I'm Susan Coffin, and you're tuned into Attitude Magazine's ADHD Experts Success at School webinar series. Today we are talking about what's ahead for parents once school starts after this long and glorious summer, and that is the dreaded homework hours. Almost universally, our readers and our listeners tell us about their children's students who forget to write down assignments, who lose their homework sheets, and frankly about their struggles to manage the homework hours while also dealing with making dinner, managing other activities. It's pretty much something that's really tough for everybody. Today we are so pleased to welcome back our guest speaker, Dr. Peg Dawson, who will be offering some straightforward advice and steps to take in order to end this frustration and fights over getting homework done. For those of you who may not have had the privilege of listening to Dr. Dawson before, she is just a font of knowledge because she is someone who's worked with children for over 30 years, first as a school psychologist in Maine and New Hampshire, and for the last 20 years at the Center for Learning and Attention Disorders in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where she specializes in the assessment of both children and adults with learning and attention disorders. She received her doctorate in clinical psychology from the University of Virginia and is the co-author of two really terrific books that I recommend to you on improving executive function skills. The first one's called Smart But Scattered, and the follow-up is called Smart But Scattered Teens. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Dawson. We're always happy to have you. I would also like to thank the sponsor of today's webinar, Play Attention. Play Attention is a brain training system. It's the only one that combines both neurofeedback and cognitive training to improve attention, behavior, and learning skills in both children and adults with ADHD. So you can learn more about Play Attention at their website, www.playattention.com. And we thank Play Attention very much, as we always do, for their support. Before Dr. Dawson begins speaking, let me describe how ADHD Experts webinars work. You are muted. You may post your questions in the box on your screen anytime while Dr. Dawson speaking or once she starts taking questions. If you have any problems hearing us, you'll probably want to dial in via your phone line. You'll see the number on your control panel, where you'll also see under handouts a link to download today's slides now if you'd like to have them while Dr. Dawson's speaking. Check back on AttitudeMag.com webinars to play any part of this webinar later or to download the slides. With that, let me turn it over to Dr. Dawson with our thanks again for joining us today.
Okay, thanks. I'm delighted to be here. And I'm having trouble controlling my PowerPoint. So Stu, I don't know what's going on there. As I'm pushing my controls, nothing's happening, so I can't see. I'm sorry, I can't see what I'm supposed to be talking about. I can call it up on another, but you won't be able to follow along with me. So I don't know what you want me to do, Stu. I've got two screens.
I think you should just go ahead. The slides will probably catch up. Sometimes there's a lag.
Yes,
so
right.
They've gone forward too far. Yeah, back.
Okay, right. So here's, I do want to get back to the advanced organizer slide here, and that's what I'm having trouble getting to. There's a very slow lag, which again makes me think that I want to look at my own screen just to see if I can do this a different way. Okay, so just to give you a presentation overview, which is the first slide, which I can't access right now. I'm going to talk about homework in general, particularly starting with what the research says about homework, because some people are kind of surprised by what the research says. Have a little discussion about, why do teachers assign homework? How much homework is reasonable? And what kind of homework makes the most sense? And then why is homework especially challenging for kids with attention disorders? And then finally some strategies that parents may be able to apply to help homework be a little less stressful and go a little more smoothly. Okay, so what does the research say? The research says that at the elementary level, and there's been yards and yards of research done on this topic. At the elementary level, there's actually little evidence that assigning homework has much effect on school achievement. When they compare kids who in classes where teachers assign a lot of homework to kids in classes where teachers don't assign homework or assign very little, and they measure school achievement, what they find is very little difference. So I know a lot of parents of elementary kids sort of stress out about what their kids are missing if they're not doing homework. But in fact, at least as the research goes, there's minimal benefit to doing homework at that level, at least in its impact on school achievement. At the junior high level, some positive benefits to homework has been found, and at the high school level, homework now correlates significantly with school achievement. Although it's pretty complicated because, in fact, it doesn't necessarily mean the more time you spend on homework, the higher your achievement is. There seems to be sort of an optimal amount of homework. 10 hours of homework, a night is obviously not optimal. And so we can talk about why a moderate level of homework might be better than a high level of homework, if that makes sense, as we go along. Okay, so again, I'm having trouble. Let me, oh, I realize, I'm sorry. So let's start with why do we assign homework? Okay, basically, homework teaches kids habit of mind, so that there are benefits to homework separate from, there we go, someone else is controlling my PowerPoint, that's great. Separate from actual achievement, there are some good skills that can be learned from doing homework. And when I say habits of mind, I'm specifically talking about executive skills because that's my area of interest and expertise. Things like how to manage your time, how to plan, how to organize, how to keep track of things. It teaches taking responsibility for tasks. There's a little more self-responsibility involved in doing homework as opposed to doing classwork where the teacher is sort of directing activities. It helps kids learn to work independently. Some kids do that better than others, and kids with ADHD struggle with that, and so that becomes an issue of how much support do parents give to teachers, give to kids. And as I say, teaching planning and organizational skills, time management skills, and how to make good choices in terms of how kids are spending their time. If they've got 5 hours between the end of school and when they go to bed, how are they going to spend that time? And then ultimately problem-solving skills, both in terms of how to carry out the homework or even how to solve homework problems, such as, oh, I can't remember how the teacher explained for me to do this. What could I do to get the instructions? Or I need help remembering this math procedure. How am I going to get that? Or I left my math book at school. All of those require some problem solving. Okay, if we can go on to the next slide. In terms of how much homework is reasonable, this is something that the American Federation of Teachers came up with many years ago, and it keeps getting quoted. So I think people generally feel that this is reasonable. Children should do 10 minutes of homework for each grade level. Okay, so that means that at first grade they should be doing 10 minutes of homework, at second grade 20 minutes, 30 minutes in third grade, etc. And so if your child is spending way more time on that than the guidelines, then a course correction may be helpful. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. So what kind of homework makes the most sense? If you skip to the bottom of that slide, homework should not require children to learn new skills, and it should not require parents to teach those skills. So homework gives children the opportunity to practice and consolidate skills, so they should understand the assignment before they come home. It gives them practice at creative thinking or problem solving, and it gives them practice carrying out long-term projects. Okay, next slide. So why is homework so hard for kids with ADD, ADHD? And I should mention, Susan didn't mention this, but in addition to being an expert on attention disorders and executive skills, I have 2 sons of my own. They're now in their 30s, so well past the homework stage. But I dealt with a lot of these issues. My older son at the age of 14 was diagnosed with an attention disorder. So a lot of the, especially when I get to the advice level, a lot of that comes from my experience as a mom. As much as my experience as as a psychologist. So let's talk about what makes homework so hard for kids with ADHD. Next slide. First of all, school is harder for them to start with, so they have less mental energy left at the end of the day. If you think, how much effort does it take a kid with ADHD, especially if they're the more hyperactive or restless kind of kid, just to contain his body to sit in the desk all day? That burns up more energy for them, so they have less at the end of the day. Obviously, if they're taking medication, it's often worn off by the end of the day or shortly after they get home from school. And then finally, kids with ADD or ADHD have trouble making themselves pay attention to stuff that's tedious, boring, or difficult. You know, they don't have any trouble making themselves in fact, they don't have to make themselves pay attention to a video game, but homework requires them to make themselves pay attention, and that's what's hard for them. Okay, next slide. So it's hard for them to make themselves pay attention in part because of the way their brains are wired. So I want to spend a couple minutes talking about what's going on in the brains, next slide, of kids who with attention disorders. Experts on ADD, people like Russ Barkley, talk about two different kinds of attention, and they're both located in the frontal lobes of the brain. But Barkley makes a distinction, next slide, between what he calls context-dependent sustained attention and what he calls goal-directed persistence. So that first one, context-dependent sustained attention, kids with ADD have no trouble with this. Their ability to attend depends on what's happening right here, right now, and in front of them. So if the task is fun, interesting, or immediately rewarding, they have no trouble focusing. Okay, that's why they can play video games for hours. That's why they can watch TV or do fast-paced sports, you know, those kinds of things. Next slide. Goal-directed persistence, on the other hand, is a more sophisticated kind of attention, and here you have to sort of be able to set a goal, what you're hoping to accomplish, and then keep that goal in mind in the face of distractions. You have to make a plan to achieve the goal, manage the emotions involved in achieving that goal, such as diminishing negative feelings like disappointment or frustration, or sort of accessing positive emotions such as persistence to keep them working for the goal. This is a very late developing skill in all children. It's even more delayed in kids with ADHD. Okay, next slide. And there's the reward center of the brain. Okay, so again, if you have kids with ADHD, you may know some of this information already. We know that kids with ADHD, the frontal lobes of the brain, which is the part of the brain that sort of manages attention, is governed by or controlled by a neurotransmitter called dopamine. And kids with ADHD release dopamine at a lower rate, so they have this net dopamine deficit, which is why they have trouble with focus and with self-control. And frankly, that's what stimulant medications do, is they try to, in most cases, they raise dopamine levels so that kids can focus better. But dopamine doesn't just affect the frontal lobes, it also controls the reward center of the brain. And the technical term for that is the nucleus accumbens. Okay, so keep in mind, people with ADHD are releasing dopamine at a lower rate. Next slide. Because dopamine enhances the level of interest you attach to a stimulus or anything, if you're releasing dopamine at a lower rate, you find it much more difficult to get enthusiastic or to work up the enthusiasm to engage in a task you don't find naturally appealing. So that's why kids with ADHD struggle more with homework. And they struggle with, you know, any task that isn't fun and naturally appealing to them. So I see it in my practice primarily with things like homework, chores, and boring daily routines. That's what kids with ADHD struggle with. Okay, and then there's this, I'm sorry. Okay. One other thing about brain functioning, I guess didn't make it into my presentation, but there's another aspect of the brains of kids with ADHD, and that is they also have a faulty off switch for mind wandering. Okay, there's a technical term for that as well. It's called the default mode network. And what that means is when the brain is at rest, it wanders. But at the point where we have to focus, and this is how typical brains work, we shut off the mind wandering, we shut down the default mode network, and we're able to focus. The problems with kids with ADHD is they can't reliably shut off that mind wandering. So at the same time they're trying to focus, they're still being affected by all those external distractions and internal thoughts running through their heads. And as you can imagine, that makes homework challenging as well. Okay, so let's go through some strategies that parents might be able to use for making homework go more smoothly. Next slide. And these sort of fall into several categories, and I'll try to explain, each one. I don't know if you can get the next slide. The first strategy is sending clear messages to kids about homework. I think there are some parents who think that it's up to kids to do their homework and it's up to kids to remember what they have to do, and it's not their job to be involved at all. But unfortunately, what that will communicate to some kids is, well, if mom or dad don't care about my homework, why should I? So it is important for parents to make clear to their kids that homework is an important part of school. And the next message to give kids is that you'll give them support if they need it, but you won't do their homework for them. Okay, I think some parents fall into the trap of their kids sort of acting helpless, and in some cases being helpless, and so then they sort of jump in and help them out and may end up doing more of their homework for them than they should probably do. If they find that, if you as a parent are finding yourselves doing that a lot, then having a conversation with the teacher about homework that the child can do independently would probably be a good next step. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide. I just now have this clear messages about homework. Check in with your child every day. This is another way of communicating to kids that homework is important. So ask them to tell you what they have for homework. That's a quick conversation just after they get home from school or just before the homework is going to start. Sometimes just asking them to tell you what they have for homework jogs their memory. So it makes them think through what they have, or encourages them to open their assignment book. In fact, ask to see their assignment book to see what they've written down. Or go online with them if you have a child who's going to a school that posts homework assignments online, and check the homework with them there. If their answers aren't trustworthy, and kids, and that happens with ADHD kids for any number of reasons. Probably one of the most prominent ones is kids forget. And so they sort of breeze through the day in their head and they say, oh no, I don't have any homework, forgetting that there are 2 or 3 classes where they do have homework. Sometimes kids will not tell the truth because it's easier for them. If I tell my mom I don't have to read a chapter in my social studies book, she'll never know, and so I don't have to read the chapter. Some people have described kids with ADHD as having two times, now and not now. And what they're doing now takes prominence, and they really can't picture not now. So if they want to play and that's what they want to do, then homework is not now and they don't think about it. So you may need to find ways to verify what their homework assignments are. Again, if you can go online and find it that way, that's the easiest way. But at the elementary level, very often parents and teachers work out signing off on their assignment book. So the teacher signs at the end of every day, making sure that all the assignments are written there, and the parent signs it saying that they saw the assignment book and they made sure their kid did their homework. Okay. Establishing clear homework routines. This is, and I realize everybody's life is different, and in some families every day of the week is different, but to the extent that you can make homework completion done at the same time every day, then it becomes a habit. And I often use the analogy of brushing your teeth. You know, we brush our teeth twice a day. We do it day in and day out. We don't even think about it anymore. And so it just makes it so much easier if we know it's something that we do right after breakfast or right after dinner in terms of teeth brushing. But the same thing with homework. If homework is always done at the same time every day, then that time gets carved out and set aside, and it's easier for kids to follow through. Make sure they have a clean and quiet space in which to work with all the necessary materials available. And where that space is may vary from kid to kid. You know, for some kids, you want them in the kitchen where you can keep an eye on them while you're making dinner or while you're doing other things. With other kids, they need absolute quiet. Working in the bedroom is best. You may need to check on them periodically to see how they're doing. If they tend to get distracted by technology, then you'll probably want them to be doing homework either in a setting where technology isn't available, or if they're using technology where you can sort of keep an eye on them to make sure they haven't switched off and are playing a video game or going on Facebook. Ask them to make a daily plan. This can be as simple as, and this is the way I got my son with ADD through high school. You know, every day when he came home from school, I asked him 2 questions. Okay, Aaron, what do you have to do? When are you going to do it? Just those 2 questions. If you ask other questions as well, you know, how long do you think that will take? Where are you going to work? That increases the precision with which the child is making that plan, and so the more precise, the better. But at a minimum, what do you have to do when you're going to do it? And that just becomes part of the daily conversation. And I already talked about setting aside the same time every day whenever you can. Okay, next slide. Using incentives if necessary. This part, you know, when I work with parents, this is the part they're often that can become controversial. Some parents don't want to pay kids. Pay, and I'm using that in quotes because there are different ways of building in incentives. And sometimes they say, you know, my kid, this is just as part of his life, he should be doing it anyway. Other parents worry about their kids becoming dependent on some kind of reward, and so they fear, and sometimes this actually happens where the kid says, okay, what are you going to pay me anytime the parent asks them to do something. So actually, although we talk about those kinds of tangible reinforcers, frankly, the best incentive that I've seen that works in all kinds of situations is to have the child look forward to something they get to do as soon as they finish their homework. So whatever their preferred activity is, as soon as they finish their homework, they get to do that. And so if you can build in this first work then play kind of mentality, so that, you know, yeah, they get to play video games for 30 minutes every night before bed, but they have to do their homework first. And so just giving them something to look forward to doing and having them identify what that is. It's not you deciding what the reward is, because the reward that works best for the child is more powerful than anyone a parent might come up with. Building in breaks. This may be particularly important for kids with ADHD because of their short attention span. Whenever possible, a couple ways to handle breaks. If you can build in movement in those breaks, so they're getting up and shooting a Nerf basketball over their bedroom door or something like that, or even doing jumping jacks or running around or whatever, because the interesting thing about physical exercise, it increases dopamine as well. So that's another way to increase focus by building dopamine. There are 2 ways of building in breaks. One is as soon as you finish this page, then you get a 10-minute break. Another is I'm going to set the kitchen timer for 10 minutes. As soon as it rings, you get to take a break. Sometimes one of those approaches works better than another. If a kid tends to dawdle and stretch out the task, then building in a break every 10 minutes is probably not the way to do it. Rather, identify a certain amount of task to be completed before the break. Building in choice. A lot of parents will say, well, I want my kid to start with the hardest homework because he's got more energy at the beginning than he does at the end. And that makes sense on that level. However, that's taking choice away from the child. So whenever possible, any kind of choice, even if it's when are you going to start your homework, you can either start just before dinner or just after dinner. I mean, if you may need to limit the choices because they would make bad choices, but even just giving them limited choice is better than no choice at all. You know, when do you want to take the breaks? Let's look at your work. Let's figure out when's a good break point. So you're building, because kids, as is true of all humans, want to be masters of their own lives. So anytime you build in choice, you're giving them a little more control of their own lives. And then if you do end up using a more tangible reinforcement system, giving them points for specific behaviors, like finishing when they said they were going to finish, or for not complaining, or not making more than 2 mistakes on their math sheet, and then let them trade in the points for a reward, such as video game time. And sometimes the point, it can be very simple, 1 point, 1 minute for whatever it is. Sometimes when you have so many points, then you get to do X, Y, or Z. Okay, and let's see if there's any more after that. Next slide. Oh yeah, supervise but don't micromanage. This is a rule of thumb which it has to be interpreted differently by every parent with each of their kids. But our general rule of thumb is provide the minimum support necessary for your child to be successful. If you provide too much support, then the child won't learn to be successful on their own. If you don't provide enough support, then they're not going to be successful. So you have to decide what's the right amount. But if you are micromanaging, you'll get pushback from your kids, maybe even starting in elementary school, but definitely by middle school. When I was with my kids, I felt like it was my job to make sure my kids finished the homework and put it in the backpack. It was the teacher's job to judge the quality, because I didn't have the time, and I thought that was the teacher's job to see what quality work is my son doing without me interfering. Okay, next slide. Look for others to help. And that means enlisting other family members if you can, grandparents, older siblings, other relatives, friends. I've had people who've hired a high school kid down the road just to sit with their kid while they do their homework, because their kid adored that high school student. It gave the high school student a little extra time, and it gave them, and it took the homework supervision out of the role of the parent. Or make homework time a family activity. Everyone gathers around the dining table to do homework, paperwork, read or do crossword puzzles. I saw a study a while back that looked at the higher levels of achievement that tend to be found in Asian American families than in other families in the United States, and one of the discriminating variables they found was that in many Asian families, homework was a family time. Everybody was doing some kind of work at a common table, and all working, both parents and kids, and so that may be something that could work successfully. And next. If homework battles threaten family functioning, make an appointment with the school. This is a huge one for parents with kids with ADD, especially those kids who the medication wears off. They have no attention span at the end of the day. They are spent, and they are going to fight tooth and nail with their parents about doing homework. I remember Russ Barkley saying many years ago, if it's significantly interfering with the parent-child relationship, homework is not worth it. And so then talking to the school about homework modifications, reducing the amount. For instance, you could say, okay, you only have to do half the math problems, or you could say, you know what, if you do the first 5 math problems and don't make any mistakes on those, you don't have to do any more math problems. And so you could work it out. I often recommend, and I've built this into IEPs and 504 plans, that it be an informal arrangement between the parent and the teacher. So the general expectation is the kid will do as much as he can, and the parent will gauge whether they've sort of reached their limit. And then they'll write a note to the teacher and say, okay, we got through as much as we could. Sometimes when that happens, teachers will prioritize. So they'll say, you know, if he can't do the entire homework load, this should be the priority. But it does make some sense to ask for modifications, and those can be built into 504 plans for kids with attention disorders. Okay, and I've got one other set I want to throw out, and then is that okay, Susan? Then we can open up for questions, because I did
that's fine. Yep.
Okay, because these are the other issues that I get from parents all the time in my seminars, and that is issues around technology and sleep. Because those come in to play with homework. Control how much time your kids are spending with technology. I think it's probably unrealistic to remove all technology from kids all the time, but how much time they're spending on technology and making play on technology contingent on homework completion makes sense to me. The overlap between technology and sleep is, there's some research to suggest that exposure to the blue screen on laptops or smartphones actually interferes with this sleep process, particularly around the melatonin releasing itself, and melatonin is what suffuses the brain and shuts it down so it'll sleep. So ideally, the experts say kids should not be on technology for 2 hours before bed. That's probably unrealistic, especially in situations where kids are actually using technology to do homework. But there's an app that you can get to extract the blue light from your laptop. I'll give you the website. It's free. It's called justgetflux.com, and that's F-L-U-X, justgetflux.com. You load it on, and it controls the amount of blue light on your screen based on sunrise and sunset in your time zone. Build-in technology breaks rather than allowing children to multitask. So say to them, how long can you go before you need to go to check Facebook? Or how long can you go before you need to check your texts? Okay, we're going to set the timer, then you get the phone back then. Or please try to control that yourself if you're talking about kids in high school. Keep smartphones out of the bedroom once the lights are out. Any kid who's allowed to have a smartphone in his bedroom is everybody's asking for trouble with that. And I'd be happy to talk about that more if questions come up. Build in relaxing bedtime routines to help the child transition from the alertness of being awake to going to sleep, and then make sure kids get enough sleep. This is really hard with teenagers, but educating teenagers about the importance of sleep is probably a first place to start. Okay, I'll stop there and then open it up for questions.
Thank you so much. That was fascinating. Tons of really interesting questions. Let's start with one of your early slides about how much homework is appropriate. Should parents assume that it's okay to go to the teacher and say, this is too much homework, can you cut it back? Is that something that you see as a norm? And at what grade levels do you think that that's a reasonable request on the part of parents?
Yeah, good question. Just based on my experience, and this comes from the parents I talk with, both coming into my office and the recommendations I make to parents going out of my office, I would say it's at least worth a try. I won't even say most, I just know a fair number of parents have been able to negotiate with teachers about homework load. When they explain it in terms of an attention disorder, teachers tend to be understanding. Now it varies, and it's more likely to be the case at the elementary level. The older the child gets, the harder it is to negotiate that. But I will say, the one other area where it's worth it for parents to pursue that, I see some middle school kids who part of their attention disorder may be slow processing speed. And when they're in elementary school, they can keep up with the homework because the homework load isn't that great. When they hit middle school, there are not enough hours in the day for them to do their homework and get a good night's sleep and go to school. And so
totally
and that is the one place where I'll really push parents and push schools to make some accommodations. If the child is just a slow processor, and here's what I found, because people often say, well, can we just speed them up? No, we can't. No, if the slow processing is coming from distractibility, medication may help that, or other techniques to help them focus. But sometimes everybody works at their own pace. And if you try to speed up a slow processor, they get really nervous. And my guess is you've got parents out there listening who know what that looks like.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It causes a lot of anxiety, which
sure
is, so much intrinsic with avoiding homework, as best I can tell, oftentimes. Yeah.
Right.
Christina raises an interesting point. She says, I'm afraid that by asking the teacher to lessen the load, I'm sending my child the wrong message. The message that if they complain about something long enough, they'll get out of it. So this comes back to, I think, the kind of moral judgment that we often hear or feel ourselves, that, ADHD uses an excuse or a crutch. I mean, what's your thought about that?
Yeah. Well, it's funny because the first thought I had is, I remember we diagnosed my son's attention disorder when he was at 14, 8th grade. And, once I explained, okay, Erin, here's what ADD is all about. Within 3 weeks he came home from school and he said, Mom, I don't have to do homework. I have my ADD membership card. At which point I said, and became a line that I used more than once, ADD is an explanation, it's not an excuse.
Right.
So this helps you understand why homework is more difficult for you, but unfortunately you're not going to get out of it. But having said that, parents know their kids better than anybody else. And I think parents need to gauge, when is my kid just making an excuse and when is he really over the top? And I'm not sure if parents can't gauge that. I don't know that anybody else can. So certainly it makes sense to push kids a bit, to not give in to their first complaints. But if you watch them night in and night out, and you see them becoming more miserable, and it takes its toll over time, and now they're saying, because then I see the effects on self-esteem. How come I'm so stupid? How come everybody else can do this? And then I think it makes sense to and maybe even with the kid and the teacher together, sit down and say, we got a problem, let's see if we can come up with the best solution for this. Right.
I mean, it's interesting because some people and I'll bring up some of these questions, are talking about their kids not being motivated enough. But I also had the problem of a kid who was very motivated, and when it wasn't done by midnight, wouldn't stop. And I'd be saying, this is enough, stop now, you need your sleep, and she would be saying, why can't I get this, as you say, why can't I get this done like other kids can? So and I have to, it is challenging, and those are some of the hardest kids, those kids who don't want, and they tend to be somewhat anxious and perfectionist on top of everything else, and so they don't want to be treated differently. Sometimes I think parents have to make an executive decision. Right. And so that's where I'd say, what, my job as a parent is to make sure you get a good night's sleep and to make sure you stay healthy. So I'm imposing my rule here. Yeah, enough. Yeah. Here's some interesting questions relating to how involved to be. Kim says, my husband works with my son on math every night so that he can understand the concepts covered in class. I feel that my son is now used to being guided through every step. How can we get him to do his homework with less supervision and hand-holding? I mean, this comes back to your point about don't teach it. I mean, support, but don't teach. How do you, where's the line? And I think parents often struggle. We hear this a lot, and there are several questions about this. Are we enabling this dependence, or are we helping? How do parents figure out where that line is?
Yeah, and that's tricky too. I guess one thought I have is to be pretty upfront with your kid and say, okay, I know I'm providing a lot of support here. My goal is for you to be able to do this independently. So let's look at what your homework is. Point to the pieces that you think you can do on your own. Actually, have them do this before you even sit down and homework together. I want you to look over your assignment and put a little check mark next to the ones where you think you need help, and put a little star next to the ones you think you can do on your own. And then you and I will sit down and go through the check mark ones, and then I'll leave you to it. Or even sometimes, sort of say, okay, I've given you a little help now. I got something I got to do, so I'm going to go away for a while. I'll come check back in with you, but I'm hoping you get a few problems done while I'm gone. And so remove yourself that way as well. And Susan, I don't know if you have other ideas for that.
Well, one tip that we've heard frequently is to do the first problem with the child in a set, make sure they understand it, and then walk away. Sort of say, okay, let's make sure we understand how this problem set works, or whatever it is, and by literally going through the first one, this may be more of an elementary school strategy, but then stop after that and say, okay, I'll be back in 10 minutes or 15 minutes or whatever the time frame is. Yeah,
that makes sense to me as well.
Yeah, I think that is just always a challenge for parents. Where is the line between being supportive and being enabling? And it's just really tough. Yeah. Tracy says, my son wants me to sit with him, not to help, but just to help him stay on task. I found that also. That's the kind of body double idea, right? Having someone in the room really helps kids.
Yeah.
I guess that speaks to your point about everybody sitting around the dining room table.
Yeah, I was just thinking that.
Together.
If you can bring some work so that you're not just wasting time sitting there, but I especially, with young kids, you tend not to see that with older kids. With young kids, I don't have any problem with the parent being there, just being there. I mean, that's great.
Right.
But just have something you're doing too, and your kid will see you doing some work, and yeah, that would be. Or the other thing is having them work at the kitchen table while you're either making dinner or cleaning up after dinner, so you can check in with them, but not have to be right there.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's talk a little bit about the process of homework. A couple of questions about the schedule. The point about trying to do it at the same time every day, and preferably, I think, as you said, the same place. Is that right? The same.
Ideally, except for those kids who may need to work in a different place every night because they get bored with the last place.
Right. A couple said, how long should you wait? How much of a break should you give kids before they have to start their homework? So a lot of kids come home from school, need a break. I take it you agree that they need a break.
Yeah.
And people wonder, should you allow them to play video games then? How long a break should there be? And how do you get them then to turn to homework?
Yeah, really good question. Well, that last question is the easiest because the first thing they do when they get home before they do anything else is they make a plan.
Okay. So here's the plan. The break is this long, and
So it gives you a chance to review. So what do you have to do when you're going to do it? But you may want to write down the plan, maybe on a whiteboard. You got right handy there. So you got math, you got reading, and you got some spelling to do. How long do you think each one of those is going to take? Because you want to know how much time to allocate to that. So what order do you think you want to do those in? So if you ask those three questions. And then your answer should be built in part on how much time you think that's going to take. But man, and I've never really thought about this question before. I would want a good hour at least of non-school related play. I wouldn't necessarily. Yeah, ideally it would be something other than video games, in part because I want to use those video games as a reward for getting homework done.
Right.
And my fear is, once kids are on the video games, they have that mentality, and I mean that's a whole different world they're in, and to pull them back out of that world and put them into homework, I'd rather have them outdoors running around, climbing trees, riding bikes, playing a soccer game in the backyard. I mean, ideally, I'd like to have them doing something active, or even playing with Legos or playing dolls, or whatever. More imaginative or active play as opposed to video game play. But I don't know. I mean, my gut says at least an hour, and maybe even, when does school end? 3 to 5. Ideally, even a couple of hours.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. And then I guess your point about having a plan before that starts, so that there isn't too much of an argument when it's over.
Yeah, exactly. And man, I found that with my son, because 8th grade, again, this is where it all started, and I realized we were fighting about homework, and once I came up with that idea of tell me what your plan is, he was much more likely to follow through and do the homework without fighting because he'd made the plan. So I'd say, so wait, what was it you said you were going to start doing just, at 5 o'clock? Oh, yeah, I was going to do my chemistry. And so then he'd start doing it because he was the one who made the plan.
Yeah, that's really good if you can get your child to do a plan. Vicky's one person said that she's still working on her VA and she and her child do homework together. That sounds like a great solution. That's really great. Yeah. So one thing we do in my family, we do homework together. This is Kayleen. So that's a great suggestion. Let's see. I guess the timing of the homework, a number of people commented when you said, here's a reward after a certain amount of time, that their children, when they try to do that, rush through things, and how do they judge if something's really done, if the amount of effort is actually the right amount of effort? You
Yeah.
know, and especially if it's studying, how do they know that they've really studied? I mean, it's sort of the timing of all that, you know. I
Yeah,
think.
sure. You mean when you say studying, you mean like studying for tests?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not like there's a piece of paper that has to be completed, but rather you need to study. How do you know that that's been done?
Well, okay, two parts to that. One is, you know, they rush through it. When they're, if that's happening when kids are in elementary school, it's not hard for parents to look at the homework assignment and decide that it hasn't met their quality. I mean, they can add a quality rule into there as well.
Mm-hmm.
So either, you know, no more than X, if I find three mistakes on your math sheet, you're going to have to proofread the whole math paper before you get to do it. If, you know, I can't read your handwriting, I've had parents erase and say, okay, you're going to have to rewrite it. And I always have mixed feelings about that, but it's been effective for some kids. They really do improve the quality or the neatness of their work with that kind of an imposition. So the general rule is add a quality rule on top of the time rule. Studying for tests, and I don't mean to sell my own products here, but in a couple of our books,
Your books are great, so I recommend them. Yeah, they're really great. Yeah.
The Executive Children's, actually, we created an academic planner. This is the cheapest one, so I'll mention that. We've included a studying for tests template where we said, okay, here are 23 different strategies you can use for studying for tests. Choose 3 of them. Decide how much time you're going to spend on each one. Day 4 before the test, day 3 before the test, day 2 before the test, day 1 before the test. So that would be a way of quantifying studying for the test, like using Quizlet, making flashcards, having a parent quiz you. I mean, again, we've listed, and you may be able to find these other places as well, 23 different ways to study for a test, and that at least quantifies it. And to be honest, the feedback I get from kids, especially middle school, high school kids, when you talk to them about studying for tests, they tell you they don't know how.
Yeah, I think that's true. Right.
And so that too would be a benefit to show them, well, here are a bunch of different strategies you can use. And then suddenly studying for tests goes from an open-ended task with no clear guidelines to a closed-ended task. Oh, okay, here's what I do first, here's what I do second.
You know, we've had a number of speakers who talk about the fact that kids' apparent behavior problems, lack of motivation, resistance, is oftentimes anxiety, serious anxiety, and that sort of reflects this idea, I don't really know how to do this, but I can't say that. Yeah. And you know, it feels sometimes like people are making excuses, but I think it's true, you know, that there's a huge amount of anxiety that our kids have that sometimes manifests itself in all kinds of ways. So let's see. Which, again, can you clarify the 23 ways to study for a test? Where could they find that?
Okay. The cheapest.
Or?
No, it's in, let me see. I will see if it's in Smart But Scattered. I don't think I've got the book right here. I don't think it is. It's in the cheapest way, if you don't have any of our books, the cheapest way is we've developed, it's called Work Smart Academic Planner. And it's intended as a planner, but it also can be used as a workbook for helping kids with executive skill weaknesses.
Is that available through your site?
Yes, or it's cheapest to go through Amazon.
On Amazon, okay.
Yeah.
What's your website, Peg?
It's smartbutscatteredkids.com.
Okay, smartbutscattered.
One word, yeah. And now let me see if I have. I'm reading the contents of our teaching strategies in studying for tests. Oh, it is in Smart But Scattered as well. Okay. We may have refined it. That was the earliest version, but at least that'll give you a start.
Yeah, that's such a helpful. Interesting question here. Someone says, do executive function problems always exist in children with ADHD? Good question, because is executive function disorder the same as ADHD? So question that comes up a lot.
Okay, and here's the way I answer that. All kids with ADHD have executive skills deficits. Or executive dysfunction. Not all kids with executive skills deficits have ADHD.
Got it.
Because there are other executive skills like flexibility, for instance. A lot of kids with ADHD are very flexible. Problems with emotional control may or may not be a problem with kids with ADHD. So you can find other executive skills that may be impaired in kids, but if you look at the key symptoms of ADHD, and also just in terms of brain functioning, it's all frontal lobes, so it's all executive skills. And again, I'm sort of going off of Russ Barkley was probably the first one to basically say, ADHD is at bottom an executive dysfunction.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I hate to do this, but let's turn back to technology. There are just so many people who would love to know more about your thoughts on how to manage technology and what's the right amount of screen time. It sounded to me from what you were saying that you really don't recommend screen time until after homework is done. Is that screen time as in video games? Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, no, I could see, and I think, we should distinguish screen time, video games versus watching TV or something. I could see for some kids, especially if they are completely exhausted when they get home from school, passively watching a half-hour TV show as part of that hour or two before they start their homework. I'm more comfortable with that because that is another way to sort of shift gears off of school. And, when I make these, I always worry. I make these pronouncements. Oh, you should never do this.
Right.
And whenever I do that in an audience, someone speaks up and says, "Yeah, no, that won't work for my kid."
Right,
or,
of course,
"Wait, I found that it did work for my kid, and you just told me I shouldn't be doing that." So every parent has to decide that on their own. But just based on the experience of working with parents over the last several years, the ones I think when parents sort of ban video game play altogether during the school week, if they can get away with it, that's fine. But I will often begin a negotiation with the parents, say, I know you don't want them playing video games except on weekends, but I know you're also having trouble getting your kid through homework. Would you be willing to live with him getting to play video games for half an hour on a school night after he's done his homework and it meets your standards? So putting that back in as a reward, that's something to look forward to when the effortful task is done. There is, by the way, a book. If people are looking for more guidance about screen time, there's a book called Screen Smart Parenting.
That is a great book. We've had that speaker. Yeah, she
good.
is really terrific. Yeah, that's a great book because it puts screen time in a larger context
and a developmental context. So here's what you expect with toddlers and preschoolers and elementary age kids and middle school. Yeah,
right.
Take a look at that.
Well, who was the author? Screen Smart Parenting.
Gold something or other. And it's so funny. She asked me. Guilford asked me to review the book, and I can't think.
Yeah, I forget. I will find it, but I really recommend her just because she put it in such a large context rather than just, we tend to just see it as a bad thing. But she talked about managing screen time in terms of a whole set of sophisticated skills that our kids need to learn about technology today, right? It's not, you can just not say this is out, because that sort of tends to be the way our world worked. Jody Gold. Jody Gold is the author. Yeah. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Excellent. Good.
Yeah. So let's see. There's a great tip here from a parent. She said that she learned this tip from one of our webinars, from a book she found via the webinar, and it's about how to get her child to start his homework. And a number of people have mentioned that their child is home alone after school, and they're wondering how to get their kid to start their homework. And she has a technique, which I'll read what she wrote. Kim, every time my son begins his homework by 4:30 p.m., we put $1 in a jar. At the end of the week, we match the amount in the jar. So if he begins his homework on time for 4 days, he ends the week with $8. We feel like this is enough money for him to see that it's useful, but not, so an extravagant amount, and it seems to be really working well. So she wants to offer that tip to parents.
Oh, thank you so much. I will pass that along to people as well. Here's why this is really important. We recently wrote a book for adults, in case anybody's interested. It's called The Smart But Scattered Guide to Success. And so I started looking at the research that might be relevant to adults on every single executive skill that we describe in all our other books. And when I got to task initiation, if you go to academic search engine and type in procrastination, which is the opposite of task initiation, you'll be hit with 8,000 citations.
Right, it's almost impossible to deal with it, right?
It's a huge issue. And so that really got me thinking, man, if we can get task initiation into kids when they're young, we're going to solve a lot of problems in college and graduate school and life beyond. So I've thought a lot about how to get, and my thought was have them identify make a plan with a start time and make sure they start at that time. But I love the idea of putting in a little incentive to that.
Yeah.
As well. And I love the
And then,
matching piece too. That's really cool. I like that.
which one?
The matching. So
Oh, yeah, matching. Yeah, we actually did that with our children related to something else, internships, I think it was. Yeah, were unpaid internships when they were younger.
oh, yeah.
Yeah, so let's see. Blah, 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 blah. Kids, parents are saying, it's hard to give your child an hour break when you're worried about their medication wearing
Yeah.
off.
Right.
And others
I
are
meant-
asking about whether a second dose makes sense. I mean, parents are so hesitant, as I'm sure you know, but in
Yeah.
our experience, so hate giving their children stimulant medications. And they're wondering, how to handle that after school time frame.
Yeah, and I
medication.
should have mentioned that earlier. If you are worried about medication wearing off, you probably better throw out my recommendation about an hour break and just try to get the kid to plow through it while they're still on meds. Sometimes I'll recommend, and this particularly works well at the middle school level, because a lot of middle schools offer after-school homework clubs.
Ooh, right.
Having kids stay at school to finish their homework, because school has all these cues about doing work. And there are fewer distractions. So especially if you're worried about medication wearing off, if they stay after school an extra hour, get that homework done, and then they are home free after that. The other thing that, I've thought about this in terms of myself, but I thought about passing along this idea to kids. I work all the time, but on weekends I try to cut back a little, and I was sort of allot myself, okay, here's the work I need to do on Saturday. When I finish it, I tell myself, oh, great, I have a mini vacation between now and tomorrow.
Right.
And I'm wondering if we can get kids to think about, once they get their homework done, they have a mini vacation.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting concept.
They get to choose
Yeah,
how they
which it depends on having these great rewards, right? Something they want to do, and then
exactly.
being tuned into that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think your point about sleep was an important one. Ellen wants to know if you have any guidelines on how much sleep is enough sleep for preteens, middle schoolers specifically.
Yeah,
I
if
know
you go to the
teens don't get enough sleep. Yeah.
Yeah. If you go to the American Academy of Pediatrics and type in sleep guidelines, they'll give them to you. I saw something recently. They say that high school students need at least 8 to 9 hours. My guess is it's pretty similar for middle school. No high school kid gets 9 hours, and I don't think many of them even get 8 hours. But I would say it would be at least 8 to 9 hours at the middle school level.
Yeah. Probably this is our last question, but it's a really good one. How do we get our children to turn the homework in? I can't tell you the number of people who have talked about the homework genie who eats the homework. It just somehow disappears between home and school. Do you see that? Is this a common problem?
Yeah, it is. There are any number of reasons homework doesn't get handed in. I do think that making sure the homework actually gets in the notebook or in a homework folder. First of all, having a specific place that completed homework gets put at night after it's finished. I think it makes sense for the parents to supervise that. Because that will solve some problems right there. Because kids either leave it at school, leave it at home, or they stuff it in someplace in their books and can't remember where they stuffed it. So if it's always in the same place, that at least that reduces some of the problems. I would also with high school kids, I would be even thinking about, can you put an alarm in your smartphone to remind you to do that?
Oh, yeah.
So again, could you use technology for that? There will be times, I say this to teachers all the time. They may not like to hear me on that, but I say, I don't think it should be left to, even at middle school level, it should be left to kids to remember to hand in their homework.
That's interesting. Yeah.
In fact, what I tell teachers is, if I were teaching middle school, I'd be standing by the door at the end of the period and your ticket out.
Holding out your hand. Yeah.
Yeah. Hand me your homework. And if you don't have it, go to the end of the line and come up with a plan for when you're going to get me the homework. So I'm convinced.
Polly says they take a picture of the homework. What's interesting.
Oh.
Do they negotiate emailing it to the teacher or posting
Sure.
on
I'm a big fan of that as well. When we think about how complex life is today, we've got so many demands on working memory. Anything that makes it easier.
Right,
I'm
right.
in favor of. So I like that idea.
Yeah, it's a great idea. Our webinar listeners always have really good ideas. We thank all of you, and Peg Dawson, as always, super helpful. Thank you so much for spending time to do this. I think you're getting lots of thank yous from the participants.
Cool. Well, this was fun, and I wish I had more time to get more ideas from your audience. Sounds like there's some good people.
So 2 webinars coming up on next Wednesday, how to take control of your ADHD emotions. Emotions of ADHD, a huge topic with our listeners. And on Thursday, September 8th, back to school nutrition, supplement, and exercise plan. So turning to other ways to optimize your life when you have ADHD. Thank you, everyone. See you soon. Have a great rest of this summer. And thanks to you, Peg, and signing off. Bye, everyone.
Okay. This was fun.
Thank
Bye.
you.